Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with our host, Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
WCAT Radio presents I Thought You'd Like to Know This Too, which is the Friday edition of interviews with many interesting people who have a message for you. Our original program is on Monday, but our second program, I Thought You'd Like to Know This Too, is on Friday, and we have a very interesting guest today. His name is Jason Braun. He's the director of the Holy Apostles Online Writing Lab, a creative writing specialist. And he's also a martial arts instructor, but we'll talk about that later. But Jason, welcome to the program, and it's great to have you with us.
Yeah.
And I thought that before we get into your work as director of the Holy Apostles Online Writing Lab, that talk about your upbringing. You were a cradle Catholic, right?
That is correct, Bob. It is a little more complicated than that, though. I was a baptized Catholic, and in a small church in Hecker, Illinois, which is about a half an hour southeast of St. Louis, Missouri.
Yeah.
And my father passed away when I was young. Then at that point, I was raised. I did go to both church. I went to the Catholic Church, and I also went to the Protestant Church. And I was confirmed in the Protestant Church later on. And it is through meeting and working with Sebastian Mahfood that kind of showed me to come back to the Catholic faith and seeking, it's faith, seeking understanding. And it's been a process. And I've been drawn into so many of the good works, especially, and even the art that as Catholics we have that you don't get as much, or that I don't feel is as important in some of the Protestant side of things.
That's right. It's interesting that Sebastian Mahfood is the owner of this radio station, and actually you were a student of his, right?
Yeah, in community college. It's the place is currently called SWIC, Southwest Illinois College. Previously, and when I was there, and when Sebastian was teaching me, it was called BAC, Belleville Area College, and that was in either 1999 or it was probably in 1999 or 98 even that I took a literature course with him, and we really hit it off. And I even showed him a novel that I was working on at the time, and he gave me some really great feedback, and we kept in touch. And
well, of course now,
when they were in need of a director of the Online Writing Center, I was finishing my coursework at Southern Illinois University in composition and creative writing at the time, and they brought me on, and that was 6 or 7 years ago.
Very interesting. Now, how did you get involved in creative writing?
Well, I believe it's to take it all the way back to reading. I wasn't always a reader. I had dyslexia. And I still have it. But growing up, I didn't love books. When I got into the martial arts, I started reading books about martial arts. Then I started reading books about philosophy, and then psychology, and then literature. So it was essentially Shakespeare, and it's an interesting story actually. When you have dyslexia, you have to struggle through reading context to find out what's going on in a particular sentence. And when we got to Shakespeare, everyone in the class had to struggle to find out what was going on because the English was old-timey and a little different. So I had developed those muscles, though, by having dyslexia and by having a hard time and by having to search context for meaning to understand what's going on. So I was well prepared for Shakespeare. And also, I guess it was probably my junior year of high school when we did get to Shakespeare, and we read Hamlet aloud. And something about hearing it aloud and something about finding the meaning of these words that seemed foreign or complicated through context, I fell in love with Shakespeare, and then from then on, I couldn't stop reading. And
isn't that funny? Isn't that funny how God works?
Yeah, and by being in love with literature, you can read it, and then you want to do, you want to make some of it. So that was just the next step.
Wow, that's interesting. So, you understand that you've taught at a number of state universities, and I'm wondering how that compares to what you do at Holy Apostles College and Seminary in your role as director of the online writing lab and in the courses that you teach online.
Yeah, well, one thing I noticed at the very beginning of it, I feel like I feel like my feedback that I give to students, I'm always going to give 100%. I'm always going to make the notes. If someone is standing in front of me, or if I'm tasked with looking at a paper and providing suggestions, I feel like what I bring is going to be the same. That's how I was taught to show up. However, what is different at Holy Apostles is how the student responds to the suggestion, how the student how thankful they are, for the suggestions, for the notes, and for the time that you take reading their words and thinking about what they have to say. Whereas, I'm not knocking state institutions, and it might have something to do with the schools that the students went to before they got to Holy Apostles. Maybe they, how they think about education, or it may be just that they've been taught to be thankful. So that's one thing that I really appreciate. When I give feedback, it's almost always taken, which you, as a teacher, you can't. I mean, you can't bank on that everywhere, all the time, right? But it's also always, it's listened to, and it's not that I have all the answers. I hope I'm not putting anything out there to sound that way. But it is a joy, to know that your suggestions and comments don't fall on deaf ears.
Well, one thing I know on this program, I interviewed a girl that's a student at Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and she told me that when she was going through some other universities, that it was just unbelievable. She said all they talked about was matter. They never talked about the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why she was so happy to get to Holy Apostles.
Yeah, well, and I think what you're pointing to there is also like teaching the whole person, right?
Right.
And it's not just dollars per credit hour. That's the focus. That you take certain things into account, and you get to know the student. And we all, there are things that we all come to college for, but also each of us might have a few different things that we're here for as well.
Now, I understand that Holy Apostles is really a leader in this distance learning or online learning.
Yeah, we've Sebastian is a big part of that. He got me to go through the certification through the National Catholic Education Association both in online teaching and learning certification and the teaching research design. This is back in 2012. And then we worked with them to create a massive open online course, what's frequently abbreviated to MOOC. And so we've been doing those sorts of things, and those are things we do that are free to the public. If you want to get a certificate, there's a small fee, but those are courses that I only worked with them. I didn't create. I don't want to say that I created them. I worked with Sebastian and others to put those together and to attend to questions and comments that students had while they were going through those things. And this is one of the futures of education, that students anywhere in the world can get some of the best education possible for free, and as many of them that want to show up can online. So and that can be a great service to people that are stuck at home, or that are in areas where there isn't a college around, or any number of reasons or conditions that could keep someone at home. These courses really provide a great service in that way.
Did you have any trouble adjusting to online teaching?
Well, it is a different game in that when you have all the students in class, you can say something once. It's how you put your coursework together, and you might end up having to send a number of the same emails. So managing the discussion boards, there are certain things that you're going to need to say to every student. But then when it comes to their papers, that's still the same. Every student has their own paper, and in composition and in writing essays and that sort of thing, really where I think the work happens and where students really learn is through revision. So my students always have, I put a grade on the paper, and they always have a week to revise it for a better grade. Because from where I'm sitting, there are plenty of English professors that talk about revision is what writers do, and they say that, but if you grade the same way, if you just give them one grade, then are you really standing behind that, right? So I'm a firm believer in revision, and I believe that's really where the learning happens. The learning doesn't happen when they walk in with the one draft, and then I judge them. The learning happens when you say, this is what needs to be done, and this is, and I believe that's really what my task is, what my job is, to point to the way, and to point out these specific areas that need to be raised, and to let them do the work. So that's going to be whether in person or online. So have you always taught distance learning, or was there something before that? I was already teaching. I was already teaching at SIUE. I was teaching composition in regular classrooms at the time, and before that, I worked as a substitute teacher and as a teacher in summer camps with kids, all the way down to teaching. I was teaching percussion, and then podcasting, to grade schoolers, and teaching journalism to 8th graders and whoever was in my camp or whatever class I was teaching that day. I also was lucky enough to work at the St. Louis Science Center for a couple of years, doing children's theater and that sort of thing, demonstrating these ideas and putting on shows. Wow. I do love teaching, and if I love something, I want to help other people learn about it and help them do it as well. It's just I can't really stop myself. whether that's with writing or martial arts or whatever.
Have you ever met any of your students?
I have not met any of my students from Holy Apostles yet. That would be something I'm looking forward to. And there's some that, especially with the online writing center, there's some that I have worked with over a course of some that I've worked with as undergraduates that have became graduate students, and there's some that you see that they really get something from the lab, and you see their writing improve over the course of the years. And the students in the graduate school, they do have thesis advisors, and they do a lot of reading of the more longer works and that sort of thing. But I do get those too. And when you read, 50 pages of what somebody's put their heart and soul into, you get to know them, right? And I would love to meet some of them one of these days.
Now, what happens to these people that are that you're teaching? Where do they go? What's their future like?
Well, I think many of them come in that are there's a lot of people that are already educators, and they're just they're getting further certificates, or they're doing some graduate work.
I see.
Yeah, and many are clergy as well. I've worked with priests and nuns, especially from I think we have relationships with some all across the world. And I've worked with people we have a lot of military personnel as well. So we have people from all kinds of backgrounds and from all over the world, actually. Those present you with unique and interesting challenges, and sometimes the teacher is the one that learns the most.
Yeah. Now, what are some of the most common things that your students struggle with? And what do they do well?
Yeah. Well, some of the first things is just getting started. Sometimes students, they think that the first sentence they write has to be perfect. And I think part of using the computer, I love computers. I'm a believer in technology. But when it comes to a first draft, I usually myself I start on paper, and I recommend that especially if they're jammed up and if they're having a hard time starting, because you write something on paper and it doesn't have to look perfect. Once you're typing that first sentence, if you don't absolutely love it, you might not get beyond that first sentence. So I recommend that. And a lot of times students are not sure about the genre, or they don't know how this thing should look, how this paper should look. And we're just talking about formatting and that sort of thing. So we do have examples, and I send them examples of what shape, where your name should go. These are some basic things that until you start writing on a college level, you might not know. The final thing that sometimes they struggle with is knowing about citations, right? And there are many different citation styles. We have one here at Holy Apostles that's based on the Chicago style, but students frequently are used to the MLA style or an APA, and these are just how you use quotations and that sort of thing. They can get nervous about all these things, but I always like to remind them that the point of all these things is to show where you got this information. And if you're honest and you're clear, and if you're getting information from a source and you let us know what that source was, that's the most important part of all this. So we can go and read more if we want to, and so you have a strong argument. Speaking of arguments, that is the one thing that our students do very well. They understand, as the students that come to Holy Apostles, they do understand how to make a point and how to craft it and this is one thing, this contrasts with much of my experience working at state universities. The students are they're more wishy-washy. They're not quite sure. They don't have, less often do those students that I worked with at SIUE or Western Illinois University, less often those students really have a point they want to make. But our students at Holy Apostles, they do have convictions, and then they are ready to make a point and stand behind them. And that's really what good writing is about. If you don't have a point, and if you don't have some ground you want to defend or gain, or if you don't have any skin in the game, as they say, it's not that interesting, right? And the writing won't be as compelling. So our students do that very well.
So that's one of the things they do well, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
As well as the attentiveness and responsiveness to feedback and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I was going to tell you about a priest that I worked with back in the 90s in Cincinnati. His name was Father Al Lauer. He died in 2002. But you talk about you like to start by writing on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote, this is really before computers really became, I don't think he was much of a computer man, but he wrote everything that, he wrote many pamphlets and magazines and homilies and you name it, and teachings, but he wrote everything on a legal pad before the Blessed Sacrament.
Yeah. I'm a yellow legal pad. That's what I do. I've got hundreds of them that are full. And I write 3 pages every day, minimum. I believe, in the Nicomachean ethics that we, paraphrased by, that to say that we are what we do most frequently, right? And if you are right, then you show up, and that's what you do. I look at writing. There's a lot of people in the writing community that are new agey or that are into waiting around for inspiration. I think of writing more in an athletic sort of way, right? Like no football player would have told Vince Lombardi that they weren't inspired today, right?
Right.
That you better be fired up with enthusiasm, or you will be fired with enthusiasm. And I believe in showing up and doing the work. And I'm working on a book, and it'd be something. It's something about if Vince Lombardi created an MFA program, and
oh yeah,
we'll see how that turns out. Yeah,
really, that's an interesting subject.
Well, he's full of poetry. I mean, all those things, that does what poetry is always trying to do. All of those sayings where he turns a word to mean the opposite thing, and he had millions of those. And it is a very Aristotelian idea, right? That you show up, you do the work, you are what you do most frequently, right? When he said winning is a habit, unfortunately, so is losing. That's pretty much the same idea there.
Did he also say winning is everything, or?
He did. I think that's what you're aiming. I don't know if that rings as true to his total philosophy. But yeah. Well, I mean, you could say that, like, I mean, I think that part of that is if you're not aiming at winning, then what are you doing, right? You know,
exactly. That's the goal.
If you go out, greatness doesn't happen accidentally, right? Like you have, you do have to show up, and you do have to put in the work, whether you're feeling like you want to or not. And I'm not saying that for 10 years or maybe even 12 years now, I've wrote 3 pages every day, and it's not that this is all gold or that it's all great things. It's that I'm tuning in and I'm keeping my chops up, as a musician would say. I'm checking in, and I'm doing some work and keeping that fluency, and so that whenever I do need to sit down and write something more important, it won't be an ordeal. And when you do sit down every day, sometimes good stuff shows up. Just by the times at bat, you're going to connect sooner or later.
By the way, my brother-in-law was a trainer for the Packers under Lombardi.
Wow. Yeah.
But I never really got a chance to talk to him too much about Lombardi.
Yeah.
And right now he died rather young, so I can't direct you to him to get some thoughts from him. So that would have been good. You're clearly fascinated with new media and digital humanities, and you've done a bit of research into how the Catholic tradition has shaped these fields. Now, can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Well, so there's 2 key figures that I've read a lot about and worked with quite a bit, and they're both Jesuits. One is Roberto Busa, and the other one is Walter Jeong. And so Busa, Father Busa, was a Jesuit, and he went to the founder of IBM, Thomas J. Watson, in 1949, and got IBM to let him use their massive computers in those days, right?
Wow.
And he created the Index Thomiscus, which was like a concordance. So he created this so you could search all of these documents. And a lot of this was done with the Bible and with the works of Thomas Aquinas. So he put all this in there so you could search them basically the way we search the internet now. So, and in those days, that meant you had to type. They were typing in everything, and they couldn't just copy it from one place and put it in there. So they input all this data, and it took them 30 years to do this.
Wow!
For scholarship and for theologians and for so many people to have access to this, right? Like, and this was you couldn't carry all these things around, all these texts around with you, but you could put it on a database, right? And you can also search it. Say you wanted to. We take a lot of these things for granted now, right? Like if you want to know. In what poem was God compared to this sunrise, or, you know what I mean? Whatever you want to find.
Yes.
Like, we can find these things now, and we take that for granted. However, back in 1949, computers were merely the domain of business to crunch numbers and for the military to compute missile trajectories. Right, so many people talk about Father Busa as one of the founders in this field of digital humanities.
Wow,
right, so which is using computers not for science, not for business, but for the humanities. To put the same sort of horsepower that we have of computing to the use of the whole human, as opposed to just finance or science or that sort of thing. The other major figure. Pardon me.
No, go ahead.
Okay. The other major figure is Father Walter Ong, who's a Jesuit and a professor at SLU here in St. Louis. And his work was about how moving from an oral culture to a text-based culture changes so much of how we think about the world, how we think about ourselves, and how we should think about education. One of his major works is Orality and Literacy. And he had a lot of ideas about even, he wrote about where we were then in the 50s and 60s, or Orality and Literacy came out in 82, but how looking in the screens and looking in the books and how this was shaping our education and how we conceive of the world. And there's still so much there that we're still applying, and it's still such a very rich text that he produced that we're still using and applying in new ways. So these two were both kind of at the center of those things. And there is a long tradition in the Catholic faith of leading as educators and specifically using technology to achieve a greater good, to a greater many, right? And getting the education out there to a population that wouldn't have had it otherwise.
I remember reading way back in the 70s, Pope Paul VI talked about, and he was a real visionary about those things, and he talked in those days about the advances that were coming. Mm-hmm. It's just really exciting to see that. And here they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and more is coming through every day. And really, what we did with the MOOC at Holy Apostles, the idea is that these things were massive at first, right? You could have as many students as you wanted in these free courses. However, the other thing, because the cost goes down as you have many more people, you can also make smaller courses, since you're not having to be in one place at one time. Or you can have a course that maybe you could have a very specific course for 100 people, and maybe only 100 people take it every year, but you could be talking about a very specific important group. It could be designs just for principals at Catholic schools or something like that. So you can slice the pie very thin in terms of the subject, and if you deliver it across the country or across the world, then you can get it to enough people to make it worthwhile. So there's also, it's not just the massive part, but because of the tools and the way we can produce and deliver these things, sometimes the smaller courses can be brilliant and can serve a niche that would otherwise not be served.
Now, you mentioned the MOOCs. Mm-hmm. What do those letters stand for then?
Massive Open Online Course.
Okay. And you talked about studying coding at boot camps.
Yeah. So I went up to Chicago to a place called General Assembly, and I took a 2-day course in Ruby on Rails, which is a programming framework, and these are popping up all over the place. for people that just want skills as opposed to going for a whole program, right? So education is being disrupted right now, and there are so many options, and there's so many things that are going to happen, right? Like, and those, with technology, it changes so fast. There is something still to be said for the kind of education you can receive at Holy Apostles, where the whole student learns. You're teaching the whole student, not just one particular skill. You're learning foreign language. You're learning theology. You're learning philosophy. You're learning all of these things as opposed to just say engineering, or as opposed to just say pre-law or that sort of thing. But education is being disrupted, and I'm glad that I'm part of being at the front of it. And I am always trying to go and experience a new kind of a new way of learning, and to be in martial arts we say, is to have that white belt mind, right? To go somewhere and not be the smartest person in the room, or to not be the expert. And I've gotten pretty good at that. I crave that sort of thing, and for me, it's not just to go there and learn a different subject, but also to see how people are teaching that subject and what different ways you can learn.
Now, what about, you mentioned improvisation at Second City Theater.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to take a couple courses at Second City in Chicago, which is the Harvard of comedy. And both times before walking in, I mean, it's just a class. I wasn't going to be on stage in front of hundreds of people, but I did feel pangs of nervousness. I took an improvisation and acting class once, and another time I took an improvisation for business clients, which is basically like copywriting and using humor and that sort of thing. And those are again 2-day intensives, but you're on your feet, you're moving around, and you're in rooms with some pretty funny people. And by being there, and though I'm a creative writer, the improvisation is not exactly my strong suit, and even copywriting wasn't. I've done a little public relations and that sort of thing, but it was great to be there and to be a beginner again, and to see how they teach these things, as opposed to your standard college class that lasts 16 weeks, and you have these sorts of expectations. Whereas there, you're going to come up with something and share it in front of everybody within an hour or within a half an hour.
So how have these experiences, the studying coding at boot camps and the improvisation at Second City Theater, how have these experiences shaped the way you think about education?
Well, I think it has to do with what a course is made for, right? Like, what is the journey, and like different subjects. Like every subject doesn't need to be taught in the same kind of way. There are things that do fit perfectly into a weekend or a bite-sized class, or just one evening. You can go and learn one thing in one evening, but that does create a different kind of relationship with the student. And it is you can get a different experience when you are with the student for a much longer period of time. But the real trick is to conceive of each class as having a beginning and an end. And each class in a 16-week course, if that can feel like it stands alone, with a beginning and an end, and if a student can leave each class feeling like there is a concrete thing that they've learned, or that they've thought about that they haven't thought about before. I believe that's the goal.
Can you give us an example of how you use humor?
Let's see. Well, frequently we make mistakes in our writing, and I'll show them mistakes I've made, or I created this app, homophoncheck.com, which is a free web app where you go and you copy your text that you've written, in a Word document or whatever, and you paste it in there, and it'll show you. It highlights the 40 most commonly confused homophones. So there, and there. So it'll highlight each of those and let you see. And whenever I make a mistake, it's easy to do these sorts of things when you're writing, tens of emails every day, or hundreds, right? Whenever I do that, I will make a note that's why I invented homophone check, because I mess those things up too, just like anyone else. So that's one way. Yeah.
Explain that a little more now. Homophone.
Homophone check. So words that sound alike.
Okay.
You have two and two, like T-O, T-O-O, and T-W-O.
Yeah.
So frequently, it may have gotten worse since people text all the time. I'm not sure. But frequently those kinds of words are used interchangeably when people are writing fast or not paying attention. So,
I see.
And as a person with dyslexia, I found that I was doing that maybe more than some of my peers. So I decided, why not build something to check for this? Because
it's like spell check. Then is it like spell check?
Yeah. Well, and Microsoft Word has some of this built into it, but much of these it doesn't catch. Many of these it misses. So the English language has more than it has thousands of these actually. But I just through an analysis I came up with a list of 40 of the most commonly confused ones. And this is something I worked with a friend of mine, Dan McKenzie, and he programmed it. So he built it. I told him what I thought the problem was, how we could do this. I drew it and described all of these things, and we worked together to make it happen. And we put it out there in the world, and it's a free service. We don't keep anyone's data. Whatever they put in there and check, we don't track any of that or anything. But I get an email every other month or so from someone or their mother saying, thanks for creating this, that, I've confused these words time and time again, and it's a great feeling to make a tool. As much as I like writing poetry or fiction or essays, there's something more compelling, or there's something that feels better about making a tool that other people can use to do their own writing.
So how did you come up with that idea?
Well, after studying educational technology and reading what people like Ong and Busa, after seeing what they did, it's basically if you already use a computer, you'll be familiar with the search function, right? So, and you can also hit like Command Find or Control F, and that'll search whatever document you have. So basically, I made a list of words that we commonly confuse, And I just asked my friend Dan to make a small program that searches for those words in someone's essay or in a letter they wrote. So it was really, in terms of the concept behind it, really it was quite simple to do that. You just have 40 words that it searches for, and that's the first part of the program. Then it highlights them, and I did write a sentence for each of those words. So two, I have TOO used in a sentence one way, and I obviously have TO used in a sentence another way, and I have TO or TWO used in a sentence another way. And I list the most common usage of it as its most common part of speech, whether it's a verb or an adjective or whatever, and that sort of thing. And it was, it was a pretty simple idea, at least from where I'm sitting, as a guy who would mess these things up quite a bit. And I like to show people that, you can, if there's a problem and you figure out what that problem is, you can create the solution, and then you can create it not just for yourself, but for the world. Right?
I like that.
Thank you.
In addition to your master's degrees, one in English and one in educational technology, you studied philosophy on the graduate level at Holy Apostles. Now, what have you taken away from that experience?
What I loved the most was reading the Nicomachean Ethics and getting back to these early philosophers who really shaped how we thought. And it is those same kinds of things that, I mean, it seems funny to say, but it is the same kind of things that Vince Lombardi talked about, that we are, we are what we do most frequently. So, to pay attention to our habits, right? To where we spend our money, where we spend our time, that sort of examine life. It made me think again things. And so much of what's coming out in self-help books, and even things that are coming out in areas like behavioral economics, where there's scholarship and data and research studies coming out. So many of those things come from the Nicomachean Ethics. Ideas like you've heard Jim Rohn say that you're the average of the 7 people you spend the most of your time with. This is an idea that traces back to the Nicomachean Ethics and the writings on friendship, right? Like, the birds of a feather. It's an old saying, but they do flock together. And who we surround ourselves with has a lot to do with who we become. And all of that goes back. All of that goes back to those first philosophers. Now,
Vince and I were going to get to this, and you practice and teach martial arts. Now, how does this relate to your day job at Holy Apostles?
Well, I believe that it's the thing about Holy Apostles and the thing about Okinawan karate is that it is about teaching the whole person, as opposed to, say, those computer coding boot camps. They're not about teaching the whole person, right? It's one specific skill. But with most good martial arts, they want you to leave there as a better person, not just a person who can defend themselves. And I would say at Holy Apostles that it's just as true. So those things are the same. There's something easier about martial arts, though, sometimes, right? You can put someone in a particular hold, in a headlock or a chokehold, and you can ask them, do you want to learn how to get out of it, right? And they always say yes, right?
Right.
However, there's been some classes when I say, not necessarily Holy Apostles, but at some other colleges where I say, okay, you have this paper to do, and I know how difficult it is, and I know what kind of a challenge they have in store for them. I have in store for them, but they don't always know, right? I'm working and I'm constantly racking my brain for ways to make writing assignments or ways to make the challenge that they're presented with as visceral or as obvious as that. And I think a lot of it has to do with why you show up. When you know why you're at a martial arts class. You want fitness, you want to be able to defend yourself, and you might just think it's cool, right? That is why some people show up, right? Like you're intrinsically interested in it.
Right.
However, teaching a required course, right? If it's a course that every college student has to take, then there's sometimes a different mindset, right? Then, there might be lots of reasons or lots of things you can learn from something, but when you don't feel that it's your first place, right, or if you don't know exactly why you're there, sometimes you may be less invested. So I do, make a point, that this writing is communication. This is about, getting what you want out of life, about being of service, and about not being misunderstood. Frequently, we are misunderstood in life. But if we think about what we're going to say before we say it, and if we make notes, and if we know that we are going to have a difficult discussion, which some people say a person's success can be judged by how many difficult conversations they've had, right? Like if you plan for those difficult conversations and understand your audience, which is the person you're talking to, right? Then you can have more success in most areas of your life. And so I try to make the reason for learning and all of the positive potential outcomes as clear as if someone was putting you in a headlock.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, when you're not teaching, you're out hiking everywhere from Alaska to Big Bend National Park in Texas along the Rio Grande. What moves you to go into those wild places?
Well, I love books, and I love writing, and especially after grad school, or in grad school, and for a little while afterwards, I found myself sitting inside reading books, and you can get pretty good at that. But I put on 50 pounds doing that, and and I had problems with my health, and I bought a Fitbit. So it is, I'm using this technology, so I got a Fitbit and I started walking around the neighborhood, and then you get to the end of it's a watch that tracks your steps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it counts. So it's a pedometer. So it counts your steps. So I started doing that, and then I was just walking around the town I was living in, Macomb, Illinois at the time, and I would get to the end of the sidewalk, and I would keep walking, and then I went to the park, and from there I went out to trails, and now I even run some of the time. And and if you would have told me that I would be doing that, if you would have said that a couple of years ago, I would have thought, that's a crazy idea.
Interesting.
But it is beautiful, and there is more. I am an English teacher, but I have to admit there is more to life than books.
I was thinking about this trail out here. I'm lost the name now. Oh, the Appalachian Trail. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I'll hike. I will hike the entirety of it one day.
It starts in Georgia and goes all the way to Maine.
Yeah, it's over 2,000. I think over 2,200 miles. Yeah, there's a great book about it written by Bill Bryson called "A Walk in the Woods."
Right.
Yeah, and I've hiked a little bit in the Appalachians. I've hiked in North Carolina near Asheville. It was actually most of the hiking I did there was in the Blue Ridge Mountains, but it is part of the Appalachians. That whole section of mountains there, and it is beautiful, and it is a rainforest. Right after going there and hiking there, I'll hike in the rain as long as I'm not up in the middle of the mountains where there's nothing above me, right? Because you don't want to get hit by lightning. But yeah, when you hike near Asheville, you're in a rainforest area, and every day you go out, I mean it's going to rain. So that kind of reset my expectations, and I think Vince Lombardi would approve. I think he would say, you get out, if you're a hiker, you get out there and hike. You don't go on the clearest and beautiful days. But and that's another thing I do every day. I write every day, 3 pages every day, and I get
even while you're hiking. Even while you're hiking.
Yeah. Well, and I aim for 10 miles every day, even when I'm at home. But most days I get over 7. So I'm a firm believer in daily practice, and those are 2 things that I really swear by.
Well, I learned that too because I was a marathon runner.
Oh, really?
And one of the craziest things I did was run around Lake Superior.
Yeah.
1,140 miles.
Wow.
And we did 50 miles a day.
Wow.
And we did it in 2 years, though, because the fellow I ran with, he only had a 2-week vacation, so we couldn't do it in 2 weeks.
So you're an ultra-marathoner then?
Well, I've done that too, 50-milers and stuff.
Yeah.
I've run the Boston 8 times, and so I know a little bit about this outdoor stuff you're talking about.
I think, and at first I thought that that was all crazy talk, these ultramarathons.
Yeah.
But when I read the books, and I've read Born to Run, and I've read Scott Jurick's Eat and Run, and I've read Ultramarathon Man as well, and when I read them, to me it sounds like the same world I experience. It's just that they're moving faster, right? It is the same love of nature.
Exactly.
And exercise.
A couple of classics are the Western 100, and then there's one out east here that's 100-miler too.
Yeah.
And they find out that.
After you.
Go ahead. No,
that Western 100, I believe, was started as a horse race. The Western States, which is incredible, and a guy showed up, and his horse could not compete. And this was a big guy. He wasn't the smallest. He wasn't like a super small, super fit jockey. He was a good full-size man. and he said, "Well, heck with it. I'm gonna run." And
I
think
that's right.
He finished.
Well, horses can't run marathons because they sweat too much or something like that, and they can't. They can beat you, on a short run, but they can't beat you in a marathon. So they can't hold up. Well, anyway, Jason, we're out of time. We've been talking with Jason Braun. He was the director of the He's the director of the Holy Apostles Online Writing Lab. Holy Apostles College and Seminary is located in Cromwell, Connecticut. He's a creative writing specialist, and like he said, he's a martial arts instructor also, and a hiker, and very interesting guy. I tell you, I was really impressed with everything you said today, and you have you have so much enthusiasm and so much drive and excitement and commitment, and it was just really, really inspiring today. So I thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me on, Bob.
And hope to meet you someday, and we'll talk more about hockey and about how that can even relate to martial arts, right?
I believe it is one.
Okay. Being that I've called hockey, I've broadcast hockey for 35 years in college, so. But this ends our program. We'll be back again next week, same time, same station. In the meantime, may God bless each and every one of you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.